So let's talk about one of the most controversial, most divisive sequels in gaming history, Zelda II: The Adventure of Link. It's a game that so many fans either absolutely despise or are just completely baffled by. But what if its biggest flaws were actually hiding its greatest strengths? Today, we're going to unravel the very complicated legacy of this infamous sequel.
And really, this question is the whole story when it comes to Zelda II. It's all about a brilliant, kind of groundbreaking mechanic that was almost completely buried by the, let's be honest, frustrating game that Nintendo built around it.
You have to remember, after the first Legend of Zelda completely changed the game, Nintendo could have just played it safe, but instead, they took this massive risk. The Adventure of Link was a totally radical departure, and you can bet anyone opening this instruction booklet back in '87 knew right away this was not the Zelda they were used to.
So what exactly made this sequel such an oddball? It wasn't just a new adventure, it was a completely different kind of game. And for a lot of people, it was not the Zelda they were expecting at all.
Oh yeah, it almost immediately got the title of the franchise's black sheep. That classic top-down exploration? Gone. It was replaced by a side-scrolling action RPG. The puzzles were pretty much non-existent. The new focus was all about combat and leveling up, which made it feel, well, almost unrecognizable as a Zelda game.
Even the story itself was a total departure. According to the manual, this new 16-year-old Link wasn't even saving the Zelda we all knew from the first game. Nope, this was a much older princess who was put into an eternal sleep centuries ago. It was just a weird, fascinating setup for an equally weird game.
But, and this is where the story gets really interesting, underneath that brutal, confusing exterior, Zelda II was hiding something truly special, a real diamond in the rough.
I mean, just listening to this quote from Goomba Stomp. From a purely mechanical standpoint, Zelda 2's combat might just be the best the entire NES console has to offer. Now that is a bold claim for the so-called black sheep of the series, right?
So what made it so good? Well, first off, the controls were incredibly fluid and responsive. Link can move, jump, and attack with this smoothness that was just so rare for the time. This wasn't about button mashing, this was all about skill. You had to time your blocks, you had to duck under attacks, and you really had to use vertical space by jumping and striking.
And the system really shined in those one-on-one duels, especially against enemies like the Iron Knuckles. These guys weren't your simple monsters. They had a shield and a sword, just like you. They could block high, they could block low, forcing you into these tense, strategic sword fights where you had to find an opening.
Yeah, these encounters were fast, they were brutal, and they absolutely demanded that you master the mechanics. You couldn't just grind out a few levels and brute force your way through it. Pure skill was the only real way to win.
Okay, so if the combat was this amazing, why on earth is the game remembered for being so frustrating? Well, that's because a great mechanic can't just exist in a bubble. It's all about the design of the game that's built around it.
And that really gets to the heart of the problem. Good gameplay is, well, pretty much nothing without good game design. Zelda 2's incredible combat system was basically trapped inside a game that often felt like it was actively working against you.
Now this is just fascinating. In an interview years later, the director, Tadashi Sugiyama, gave us a peek into their thinking. Players felt the difficulty was just unfair, but the intent was, and I quote, to have them played for as long as possible. We all felt lost and confused. They saw the random monster encounters as adding a fun luck factor. And that brutal learning curve? Well, that's because the developers themselves became total experts from playing it over and over during debugging.
A perfect example of this design disconnect was hiding essential moves. The upward and downward sword strikes feel completely natural to the combat, right? But they were treated as optional upgrades you had to find hidden away in towns. This meant the already brutal early game was even harder because you didn't even have your full intuitive moveset.
So, in the end, the game's entire structure just didn't do its own mechanics any justice. The pacing felt all over the place, the difficulty would spike like crazy, and players would get stuck all the time, never even reaching the later parts of the game where that combat could have really opened up and shined.
But you know what? The story doesn't end there. Because despite all its flaws, Zelda 2 left a surprisingly big mark on the series. And decades later, fans would decide to take matters into their own hands.
It's kind of amazing, really. This black sheep had a huge influence on the series. Town names you see here, like Saria, Rauru, and Ruto, became iconic characters in Ocarina of Time. And those sword techniques, the downward and jump strikes, They became absolute staples of Link's arsenal in pretty much every 3D Zelda game that came after.
Still, the original game was always this frustrating what if, a flawed gem. That is, until dedicated fans decided that if Nintendo wasn't going to fix the game, they would. Using something called ROM hacks, which let them modify the original game's code, they set out to finally polish that gem themselves.
And you can just feel the passion, and maybe a little bit of old frustration, in this fan review. For years, people who loved the idea of Zelda II, who saw that diamond in the rough, dreamed of a version that just smoothed out all the stupid things and let that amazing combat shine.
And that's exactly what projects like Zelda II Redux did. They didn't really change the core mechanics. Instead, they rebalanced the whole game around them. They smoothed out the crazy difficulty curve, they made the cryptic puzzles a little less cryptic, and they added some nice quality of life features. Essentially, they just polished the gem that was always there.
And all of this leaves us with a final, really interesting question. By fixing a game like this, are we honoring its hidden potential? Or are we sort of erasing the rough edges and the history that made it such a unique and complicated piece of gaming history in the first place? It's a tough debate with no easy answer.